The TenTails evolved into mysterious entities known as the Shinju, each of them possessing distinctive personalities whose consciousness also stemmed from someone else, except for one, that being Jura. This entity is the strongest among them and was said to be an incarnate of the TenTails itself. It exerts authority over the other Shinju and is the mastermind behind the plan they're trying to enact. But there's one big problem with this Shinju, and that is its obsession with consuming Naruto Uzumaki. This leads me to believe that Boruto's TenTails isn't what we thought it was, as in it isn't a new TenTails that Isshiki brought to the planet. It is instead an offshoot of the one cultivated by Kaguya. Now, to understand why this makes sense, we need to understand one thing first, which is the fact that the targets of the Shinjus are based on who the person they copied had the deepest connection with. This is indicated by the female Shinju named Matsuri, revealing that she has the urge to consume Konohamaru, who is a childhood friend and secret crush of Moegi, the person she copied. Then you have the bug Shinju, also known as Mamushi, confessing that his desire is to consume Ada, who's the person the character known as Bug loved the most due to the effects of her charm ability. The same thing applies to the Sasuke Shinju known as Hidari, who wants to consume Sarada Uchiha, the daughter of the person he cloned. So what these guys have in common is that they all want to consume the person the cloned individual had the deepest emotional connection with, which should also apply to Jura. So if Jura wants to consume Naruto and he's the incarnate of the TenTails, there must be a reason why. There must be a reason why the TenTails that Jura is the literal incarnation of has a deep connection to Naruto of all people. In fact, I've argued in the past that Jura's obsession with consuming Naruto further proves that he is the embodiment of the TenTails itself, since Naruto has the deepest connection to the Tail Beast. He's the one who tackled the hatred in Kurama and the Tail Beast at large. He fought for them, protected them, and later granted them their freedom. So if every TenTails is connected, since they're but a fragment of a larger TenTails per this databook statement, it could be the case that the Biju created from a TenTails would still be connected to the other TenTails. So that could then explain why Jura would have a deep connection to Naruto because of his connection to the Biju. This could all make sense if you really wanted to, but there might be another reason. You see, the origins of the TenTails in Boruto has always been a point of contention to some extent. Some believe that Mr. Isshiki left the planet after Kaguya betrayed him and found another TenTails somehow, while some believe that this is the TenTails they arrived with since one was already planted when they got to the planet. This is purely based off what was shown in Naruto's anime, which had Kaguya descending upon the planet to a god tree that was already planted, which by the way was stated by her servant who had been there for over several millennia. This is contradicted, of course, by Boruto's manga, which outright stated that Kaguya arrived on the planet along with Isshiki, which is contradictory to what happened in the anime, of course. But it also implied that they were the ones who brought the TenTails to the planet. Kaguya was also meant to be fed to the TenTails to evolve it into the god tree, by the way, which is why she betrayed Isshiki. So this is either a retcon or you can simply call the anime episode filler since none of that happened in Naruto's manga. In that case, it is possible that Kaguya was fed to the TenTails and betrayed Isshiki after she was resurrected through karma. Or it could also be the case that she fed Ishiki's lower half to the TenTails to trigger its evolution. I don't know, it doesn't really matter. The point is that they were the ones who planted the TenTails we know and love per Boruto's manga, which means that the new TenTails in Boruto can't also be the TenTails they came with. Now this then leads me to my belief that the TenTails in Boruto is an offshoot of the one from Naruto, which also explains why it has a connection to Naruto. You see, this goes back to a video I made a few months ago, I think, that explained what trees Matsuri was speaking to, which I believe is the TenTails from Naruto, which has roots spreading across the entire planet. This first happened when Kaguya came to the planet and cultivated her divine tree, because as stated by Amado in chapter 46, the TenTails is planted in the ground and its roots then grows deeply, reaching across every corner of the planet, just like a mold in your bathroom. That is how it sucks the chakra from all life or living thing on the planet. We also saw this happen in the anime as well and was later confirmed to be draining the energy from places such as Mount Miyaboku. So it isn't crazy to assume that the roots reach the land of wind as well, which is what Matsuri was utilizing to locate Boruto. Now there's one problem with this theory, which is that Matsuri didn't say that the roots told her where Boruto was. She specifically said the trees. So how does that make any sense? Well, that is where a thing called root sprouts come in. You see, root sprouts often grow from adventitious buds found on a tree's extensive root system. These buds represent the formation of a plant organ in an unusual place. So root sprouts are pretty much clones of the parent plants, and they can be found a significant distance from the parent tree. They can also grow from the roots of a tree that has fallen or been cut down, such as, the divine tree itself. And this part is really important, by the way, because we've always wondered why Kaguya was surrounded by multiple divine trees in that one panel, or why Momoshiki's planet had multiple divine trees planted at the same time. This led us to assume that Momoshiki simply had multiple TenTails in his possession, or that he simply reused the same TenTails over and over again on the same planet. When the truth is that the root of the divine tree simply sprouted copies of itself across the entire planet, which then grew to perform the same function of the original divine tree, to some extent at least. This would also explain why Momoshiki was able to sprout a divine tree in one of his dimensions back in chapter 5, which he attributed to the chakra he stole from the 8-tails. What this means is that a plant organ of the 10-tails can be used to mimic the function of the actual 10-tails, likely to a much smaller extent, and simply feeding potent chakra to this root sprout per se, which is what Momoshiki did with the 8-tails chakra, can cause it to quickly grow into a fully formed divine tree. Now one might wonder why Momoshiki would feed the 8-tails chakra to a divine tree instead of just consuming it himself. Well, the most likely answer is that the root sprout can be used to absorb some energy from the planet it's planted on, which yields more benefits than simply consuming the chakra of the 8-tails. This is also likely why Momoshiki didn't consume the chakra he took from Kurama until it was completely necessary. He was likely planning on using it to create more divine trees using the root sprouts he collected. It also explains why we never saw Momoshiki with an actual 10-tails, despite the opening scene depicting him consuming a chakra fruit. And even during his fight back in chapter 7, the god tree never reverted back to a 10-tails despite being cut in half, nor did Momoshiki try to summon it for assistance when he clearly needed it. So the most likely case is that the god tree isn't an actual 10-tails, but instead a root sprout Momoshiki grew, using the chakra of the 8-tails as he stated in the novels. This also implies that the root sprouts have the ability to become a divine tree without needing to consume an Otsutsuki, likely because it stems from a god tree that already underwent that process. By the way, we know for a fact that Momoshiki didn't have a 10-tails for himself since he needed to use Isshiki's 10-tails to grow his divine tree with Kawaki's body, unless he forgot where he left his 10-tails for some reason. So the trees Matsuri refers to in chapter 17 is likely the multiple root sprouts that spawned from the roots of the 10-tails that covered every corner of the planet. Another piece of supplementary evidence that would, somewhat, support this, which is what, supplementary evidence is, would be the infinite Tsukunomi that was casted in the war. Even though the 10-tails was sealed inside Mr. Madara at the time, including the god tree itself, the root of the god tree was still active when the jutsu was casted. That's what spread across the entire planet and wrapped around everyone, which implies that the root of the 10-tails is still functional while being severed from its head. This is even more blatantly implied when everyone remained connected to the root of the 10-tails, which also remained alive somehow even after Kaguya and the body of the 10-tails was sealed away in another dimension. Naruto and Sasuke had to release the jutsu itself for the tree to release everyone from the vines that encased them. Now going back to the root sprouts, there's actually an instance of this existing on the planet in Naruto. You see, back in chapter 512, Obito, who is still pretending to be a mother at this point in time, brought Kabuto to his underground facility, where he revealed the husk of the 10-tails known as the Gedo statue, which was sitting upon what appears to be a mini divine tree. This, of course, is the very same location Team 7 visited in Boruto episode 52, which is where they encountered the evolved white Zetsu. By the way, they also foreshadowed this once again in Boruto's anime with Victor's fake divine tree. He was able to create it using a sample of the real god tree's remnants from the Fourth Great War, which he then combined with Hashirama cells, somehow, and implanted that into individuals to essentially grow the artificial divine tree using their chakra as fuel. Which of course is very similar to Mr. Momoshiki using the chakra of the 8-tails to grow the root sprouts back in his dimension. So Boruto's manga and anime has hinted at the possibility of there being offshoots of a divine tree with multiple characters over and over again, but why? Well, one could argue that it's built up to the reveal that the 10-tails in Boruto is a clone of the one from Naruto, the same 10-tails that merged with Kaguya. This would of course explain why Mr. Jura, who is the incarnation of this 10-tails, the current one, wants to consume Naruto. The original 10-tails was an aggregate of all the Biju combined, including Kurama, In fact, the TenTails absorbed half of Kurama that resided in Naruto and built a connection with him for many years. And though one could say the same for the other Biju and their Jinchuriki as well, I would argue that Kurama was a greater influence since his chakra makes up more of the TenTails than the other Biju, along with the fact that Naruto himself formed a bond with not just Kurama but the 9 Biju themselves. So if the TenTails was to have a deep connection with a Jinchuriki due to its connection to the Biju its chakra created, it would make sense that this person would be Naruto. And I know that some people believe that Jura's target is actually Kurama and he just said Naruto because he thought Naruto had Kurama, but this doesn't make sense to me since even if Naruto had Kurama, his target would have still been Kurama, so saying Naruto wouldn't make sense. It is pretty clear that his target is Naruto, and because he knew that Naruto had Kurama, he could simply trace Kurama's chakra to get to Naruto. Also, the reason why he knows this is based on the books he read, which is also why he knows about Shikadai and Team 10. He's simply operating on information that he read, which states that Naruto is the Jinchuriki of the Nine-Tails. So when he traced that chakra, he was surprised to find someone else, which is also why he wants to consume Himawari, to find out how she has that chakra instead of Naruto. So Jura's target is indeed Naruto, not Himawari or Kurama. With that said, I did question this theory of the TenTails being a clone of Kaguya's because in the other cases I mentioned, that didn't create a TenTails itself, they just created different variants of the God Tree, which implies that they can't create a TenTails with the root sprouts. It's just able to form an inferior version of the God Tree that, let's say, absorbs less chakra or it doesn't create a potent enough chakra fruit. This would also then explain why Mr. Momoshiki didn't undergo any changes or visibly increases in power when we saw him consume a fruit in the anime, yet he powered up into his awakened state after consuming Kinshiki's fruit, and Kaguya also transformed after consuming the planet's fruit. So the fruits created by these Teimu God Trees just aren't as viable as the ones created by an actual TenTails, which would then explain why Isshiki went through the process of cloning the actual TenTails instead of just planting a root sprout. Now if this turns out to be the case, I have no idea how he did it because Hamado did claim that the TenTails is a different specimen and he doesn't know where it comes from. But Hamado is not known for his truthfulness, so we can't take his word for it. All we know is that they referred to this TenTails as a juvenile and it's significantly stronger than the one in Naruto, which can mean that it's just a different TenTails that hasn't absorbed the energy of a planet, or maybe it's just the fact that it's an offshoot from the one in Shippuden which Isshiki collected. Who knows, maybe the TenTails can simply create offsprings when it amasses enough chakra similar to its ability to create root sprouts, and that simply just hasn't been revealed as yet. I guess we'll see. With that said, that is it for today's video, and I'm fully aware of the fact that some of the stuff I mentioned in this video was mentioned in a prior video, but it was relevant to the topic at hand and it supported this theory perfectly, which is why I brought it back. So, you know, shoot me. With that said guys, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.